Welcome to another edition of Your Town television program and my monthly segment on it. I'm King Grossman, live in Carmel, local author here. And my segment we call Artivism, which is looking for the intersections between art, how art informs making better communities, better people, social justice, and how, in reverse, social justice issues and injustices and things that could be better in our communities can inform our art. Also, just the joy of it. And I'm really pleased today to have three wonderful guests, but particularly with starting with Patricia Hamilton, who is an author. She's been publishing books for 35 years, her own as well as others. She helps self-published authors get their books done in quality fashion and also out there to be read. And so I'm really happy to have Patricia here. And I want to say that she has a new book out that I'm really excited to talk about. It's called Life in Pacific Grove, and it's stories of the folks of Pacific Grove. And here is a wonderful shot of her new book cover. And Patricia, why don't you talk a little bit, if you would? You just told me right before the show started that this book cover is recently redesigned, and because the book is expanded.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, King, for asking me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yes.
Yeah. Life in Pacific Grove began with some memoir classes I taught at the PG Library, and I based the theme on being here now and being present to ourself and our life in Pacific Grove. So the book had two themes: people and Pacific Grove, how we all love Pacific Grove and interact with it at work, at play, with our families, with our friends. So it was hard going in the very beginning to get enough stories. I set a goal for myself of 444 pages, which, looking at my book measuring guide, would give us an inch spine.
Yes.
It's got to be a hefty book.
Right.
So 7 by 10, 444 pages. So I had one book cover designed to fit that format, and I had some sample books printed up so I could see, what I was envisioning in my mind filling up. And now, since September, I've been gathering stories. I've been gathering, and with help from a lot of writers in Pacific Grove, a lot of people have helped me. I have so many stories now. The book has now mushroomed out to 8.5 by 11 and more than 500 pages.
My goodness, that's wonderful.
So that's why the book cover is new. I had to add that rust-colored border and things like that.
Well, yes, and it's a very handsome cover. So
thank you.
I wish you well with it. Again, that book's coming out on October 6th, and there's going to be a release at the Pacific Grove Chautauqua Days. Chautauqua Days.
Yeah.
I'm 2.5 years to the area, so this is a prime example of why knowing your local history is so important.
Right.
Whose land are we on?
Right.
Who do we share this with? And so, yes.
Well, that word Chautauqua actually comes from Chautauqua, New York.
Okay.
It's Indians there.
Yes.
And in the mid-1800s, the Chautauqua movement was started by the Methodist Church, which also started Pacific Grove as a retreat.
Right.
In those days, America was just learning how to be free. Nobody knew how to govern or, what freedom meant. So by the mid-1800s, then people were coming into their own, and lots of new religions sprang up.
Right.
The Mormons and spiritualism, and the women's suffragette movement got going, and abolition, and the Chautauqua movement was an educational and entertainment movement that the Methodist Church started to send troops of learned people and entertainers all across the country.
Okay.
Because, these were little towns forged out of the wilderness.
Right.
And so Pacific Grove built the Chautauqua Hall, and on a regular basis, troops would show up that were already arranged. There would be a scientist maybe talking about the latest discoveries.
Wow.
There would be a trio playing instruments or singing. There would be a painter showing his artwork, just a variety of educational things, because there in the small towns there were no schools.
Yeah.
Children were homeschooled. So the book is going to be released during a relatively new Pacific Grove celebration called Chautauqua Days. And it's always every year we've celebrated the return of the Monarchs. You know, the subtitle of my book is Butterfly Town, USA.
Okay. Well, there's a specific, I play golf at the Pacific Grove Golf Links, and I love the people out there, and it's a sweet course, half of it right on the seaside, and half of it back up in the eucalyptus and the cypress trees, and the spirit out there is friendly. And on the second tee box during the monarch season, there are thousands and thousands of monarchs hanging in the branches in those trees.
Isn't that something?
And so, you know, that part of Pacific Grove, I'm sure your book has stories about as well. It seems to me, you know, as a newer resident of the area living in Carmel, I hear the stories about the heart of Pacific Grove coming from the you know, folks coming here in a spiritual retreat kind of setting.
Right.
And then I hear the stories of the monarchs.
Right.
And so I would imagine you've drawn some great stories from those two areas in your book.
Well, one of the best stories in the book is written by Rebecca Riddell, a longtime resident who grew up in Pacific Grove in the 50s. And she talked about walking around downtown and walking through clouds of monarch butterflies. Wow. That's how many there were. Yes. And that's how the town got its name, Butterfly Town, USA. So they've diminished over the years. We still have the monarch sanctuary and the trees you mentioned.
Yes.
But I can just imagine, one fellow told me, yes, when he would come out to go to work, he had to wait because the monarchs would be procreating on his windshield.
There's so many of them.
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah, so he had to wait so he could go to work.
Yeah, hey, listen, come on. Yeah.
So just wonderful stories like that, getting grounded in the community.
So along the lines of the stories that you know, this again, the richness of knowing who the people are and giving them voice in a community, to me that builds community. But what were some of the more, maybe a story that you felt like was particularly something new about PG or surprising that you had no idea of, that might come to mind, or just one that you know, one or two that you felt like, wow, these were really rich stories, well, among many rich stories, I'm sure.
Right, yeah, gosh, there are just so many great stories.
Yes.
You know, the butterfly one, just some of the inventions there, like Gary Kildall.
Yes, we were talking about this before the show.
Yeah, he's the inventor of the personal computer.
And it was invented in PG.
It was, yeah. And so there's a local historian, and his name just went right out of my mind. His first name is David. He gave me a great story. He is very familiar with Kildall, and Digital Research was his company. And there's a plaque in the cement outside his house there in PG commemorating the spot where the personal computer was actually invented.
I mean, come on. What a great story to have in your book. Yeah. And so you were inspired by this, as I understand it, through some memoir classes that you put together and that you were facilitating and teaching through and with the PG Library.
Yes.
And so tell us about that experience a little bit and how you first came to say, this is a book that needs to be done.
Yes, well, I had been writing my own memoirs for the last 9 years for my grandchildren. And in the course of doing that, I've become a much better writer and investigated a lot of memoir writing aspects, you know, how to tie things together and how to write interesting. So one class I took was, became a facilitator for a method called guided autobiography, in which people write on themes of their life. And to me, the value, which has been proven now, it's the most important thing a parent can do for their children, is to leave their stories. grounds the children in who they are, and gives them a blueprint for being an adult and getting through the same challenges the parents faced. The benefits are many. So I was doing that for my grandchildren, but in the course of writing stories, I learned so much about myself using this theme-based guided autobiography method. You know, when you can reframe your life from an older standpoint and see all you've been through, you actually gain more self-awareness and self-realization, and see who you are through your acts that you've done.
It helps you get down to what really is underneath some of your thoughts and behaviors, doesn't it? When you actually really grapple with it.
Yeah. Well, what happens, you know, our minds are just so busy. You know, we've heard the term monkey mind.
Yes.
So it's just constantly thoughts racing through. But when you have to choose a few of those thoughts and put it on the paper, you've probably been aware of when you're talking and something comes out of your mouth you didn't expect. You say,
Yes.
I didn't know I felt that way.
And those surprises,
But there it is.
those surprises are some of the best parts, right?
Yeah, so until we see it in writing, we never make a decision in our brain about certain things. Once it's in writing and we, you know, it's something that's meaningful and we resonate with the words, we're very happy to be grounded in something.
Yes. Yes.
Because otherwise...
Yes. And it's like, there we are. And it kind of comes down on the page, right?
Yeah, and it's nice. Yeah, you can rest on that spot.
So taking that beyond your class to your own writing.
Right.
What are some things about, because as you know, as a writer, a fellow writer, and I love talking with other writers because it seems everybody's process is a bit different. Everyone's process is a bit different to come to what it is that is their work. That they say, okay, I don't know that a writer ever says it's finished, but they say, okay, it's ready to go to press now, I guess.
Got it, yeah.
You know, so something about what works for you and how you have kind of sorted through developing a creative process.
Well, being called on to do the memoir teaching for my business, I began giving classes, and the classes were only 2 or 3 hours each, and you have to accomplish a lot. The whole thing about writing a story is actually coming up with what the heart of the story is.
Yes.
Instead of, there's a book called, there's the situation, and then there's the story.
Yes.
You know, the situation could be I go to the golf course and I meet these friends and we play 8 holes or however many.
Yeah. Look, we'll play 9.
9?
Sometimes I quit at 8.
Yeah, just so.
just because it's been a bad day or something.
Anyway, so you play 9 holes and then you have lunch and go home. Well, that's the situation.
Right.
But what's the heart of what keeps you going back there?
Yes. That's
something
lovely.
Happening between.
That's what the story's all about.
That's the story.
Yeah.
So I've learned techniques for getting to the heart of people's stories quickly. And there's another book called Flash Nonfiction, which has a method for getting to the heart.
Oh, wow. This is good.
Yeah, this is
Flash
good.
Nonfiction.
Right.
Well, I'll tell you, I'm a big believer in that in my own writing and others. And it brings to mind a book on writing that I read years ago by Orhan Pamuk, the great novelist. And he talked about finding the heart of the story.
Right.
And everything had to be about the search for the heart of the story.
Yes.
And then he talked about, and I find this to be true, that as you search for this heart of your story, something magical happens somewhere through, and you find even a better heart that you did not even know existed.
True. Yeah.
And the other one doesn't leave. That thread is still in the story.
Right.
But another rope comes in there that's very important.
Well, you know why?
Which is cool.
Well, you know why? Because the first heart you're looking for is something your mind has made up.
Yes.
It's not coming from your heart.
From your soul, yes.
But the more you write, it comes out because you're not quite there. You haven't made that connection.
This is lovely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
very, very good.
So the way the book came about,
yes.
I needed to write my PG stories for finish up my memoir. And faced with themes for the 9 months I had offered to do the classes for the library, I set the theme of being in Pacific Grove and my life in Pacific Grove, or your life, you know, the people. And being here now, you know, what we do today is history tomorrow.
Yes.
Write it down while you can remember it before the brain goes.
Yes. Yes.
By weight. So the first couple classes, it was you know, actually, this went on for the whole months of gathering stories. People wanted to say, oh, I don't have any stories. I'm just here 2 years. But my neighbor, he's been here 60 years. Go get his stories. So I'm still facing that memoir is the past.
Okay.
But I tell them, you're as important to me today as your neighbor is.
Yes.
And I want your story in this book. It's PG today.
PG today.
Yeah, and then I want you to be grounded in your life. When you start looking at it to write it down, you'll say, you know, the stories that have come in have been amazing. Here's a great story. One of the surprises, one of the women in my first memoir class at the library, she had written for my other class and written about her great-great-uncle who lived on the East Coast and wrote poems that were maybe 40 pages long to President Lincoln during the war.
Wow. Wow.
So we published that book, and she came to this class of mine thinking we were going to do more of the past. And after the class, she hung her head, Phyllis, and I don't know if, I'm just not interested in that. She had just moved to PG, although she'd been living on the peninsula many years. But she's a big walker, and she says, I'll give it a try. I said, just give it a try. A week later, she shows up at my office, a completely transformed woman in many ways, bubbling over. She just came to hug me and thank me because where she had been walking around PG in kind of a blissful, wonderful place to be, all of a sudden she had gotten the idea to write down what she was seeing, and she wrote a wonderful, she came to ask permission to write a longer story for the book about the little libraries. PG has like 32 and counting.
Wow.
The most I've heard of
Now,
any town in the country.
That is so
in the
fabulous.
state. Yeah.
I would, you know, I don't know that.
Right.
We need to know that.
Yeah.
Yes.
On the corner of Granite and Short, there are 7 total there. One of them looks like, yeah, they all
fabulous.
hold different types of books.
Yeah.
One's for children,
How
one's for
cool.
teenagers. One is one of those red English telephone booths
Yes.
that holds magazines.
Magnificent. Read this book, folks, I'll tell you. And we're down now to our last little bit.
Okay.
But I would like to put Patricia's book cover back up on the screen just for a moment, if we could. And please tell folk how they could get in touch with you to develop their own writing, also to get a copy of this book, this
Great.
sort of thing, when it comes out.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, King. The book will be out again in Chautauqua Days in October 6th, 7th, and 8th. It'll be available at 5 venues in Chautauqua Hall, where I'll be, and my great-great-grandparents who came to Pacific Grove and were Methodist ministers attended meetings in that hall in 1890.
Wow.
So I get to launch this book, and it'll have their name in it, too.
Fabulous.
Yeah.
Fabulous.
And then Keith Larson, I didn't mention him. He's a local illustrator who early on, and he's the reason I agreed to take on such a big, mammoth project. He says, I'll do the illustrations. So it's really changed his life, and he has improved his art, and over 150 illustrations in the
Wow.
book. And he
Wow.
did the cover.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so he'll be in the library then, and we're donating all the proceeds to the library.
Magnificent.
And then the Bookworks, Nell, the owner there, she's a local girl, and she's going to have a big opening there.
Yes.
And then I'm having a PG potluck on Saturday, October 7th, noon to 2 in Jewel Park.
And your website?
lifeinpacificgrove.com.
All right.
So they can come and buy books at Chautauqua Days. It'll be up on Amazon by then as well.
Okay.
So
Well, Patricia, I want to tell you, I really thank you for being here and sharing something about yourself and your work and your art and your writing. And I'm inspired to get a copy of that book and be there so that
Yes.
you might sign it and inscribe it. Okay. And thank you for being a part of this first segment of Artivism on YourTown. And we have 2 more wonderful segments this month coming up. Thank you very much.